You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 32. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have all of you here with me this week. This is the last episode of 2021, and I'm so excited to be celebrating this event with you, this wrapping up of another calendar year, and looking forward to what 2022 is going to bring all of us. And for today's episode, I have decided to focus on something that I think we don't do enough of, and now is a wonderful time to do it, which is to celebrate you, to celebrate your success, to really take stock of all the things that you've been doing over the course of 2021 and celebrate it. I had a coaching call with a client recently, and I asked my client to share with me some of the successes that they had experienced over the course of 2021. And it brought up such a beautiful conversation. There were so many things to celebrate. I think what we tend to do at the end of the year is we look back on the whole year and we don't necessarily see all the things that we accomplished. We might be seeing the things that we want to accomplish the following year. These are the things that normally get turned into those New Year's resolutions. Okay, I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to not procrastinate. I'm going to whatever it is. We tend to think of those things as the things that we're going to do in the following year, but we don't always spend the time that we could be spending to celebrate the decisions that we made on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis, on a month-to-month basis that set us up for how we will start out our next year. And I like to think of it a little bit like a relay course where you've got a baton and you're passing the baton over to the next runner. And you can think of yourself like that. At the beginning of 2021, you were handed a baton. You were handed your professional work, your personal life in the way that it appeared after what was then, 9 months into this pandemic life that we're all currently living. And on January 1st, 2021, that was your start to this particular year. And you carried that baton forward. And now, as we wrap up on December 31st, you have now transformed your professional life, your personal life in ways that you are setting up yourself for success in the next calendar year. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through 5 different questions that I would encourage you to ask yourself so that you can really take ownership of and celebrate and acknowledge all the amazing things that you've done this year and to think about how you want to set yourself up for 2022. And as I was preparing for today's podcast, I noticed as I was going through some of my notes and some of the themes that there are a lot of themes that I wanted to talk about today that I've already talked about in previous podcast episodes. So I'm going to be mentioning those podcast episodes as we go through. So there are quite a few of them. And if you're new to the podcast, this is a great way to be introduced to some of the ideas and topics. And the idea here isn't to send you to all of them. That would be way too much. It's a bit overwhelming. But if there's a topic that resonates with you, I just wanted you to know that there is an episode on it, and here's a link to it. So if you go to the site for this particular podcast episode, you'll see all the links in the show notes. You can also, of course, search through your feed, wherever it is that you download your podcasts, and find them there. So with that, my friends, I am so excited to turn to today's episode, starting with question number 1. So the first question that I would invite you to ask yourself as we wrap up 2021 is to ask yourself what you are proud of and what are the successes that you have had this year. Now, there are successes that might seem like really small successes, but let's focus on those for a minute. There are little wins that you may be experiencing every single day. And every time you make a decision like that, where you're setting yourself up for that next win, you are in effect creating a bit of success that you can then build on and keep building on as you move forward. And there's a wonderful notion called appreciative inquiry. It's a theory. And the reason that I wanted to mention it here is because you can think about appreciative inquiry as you focus on what you've done well, where the idea is not so much to look at a situation and look at the problems and go and spend your energy solving those problems. Rather, the focus is, okay, let's look at this system and what is working well here. What are the strengths? What are the things that we can build on? And then the process requires that you focus your energy on enhancing and building the areas that are already strong. And as you go through the successes that you've had this year, I would invite you to think about the things that you're already doing well. And by doing those things, you're setting yourself up for a next level of success. And we don't know yet what that looks like, but the more you lean into those strengths, the more you build on the things you're already doing, the more that will grow. So what does this look like? On a day-to-day level, what can you be celebrating? I think anytime that you choose to chip away at a difficult task instead of scrolling on your social media feed, for example, maybe you're sitting down to write a really difficult email, or you're writing a legal argument, you're drafting the most complicated part of your contract, and you have that urge to check your email or go online and maybe see what your friends are doing, or go up and talk to the person in the office down the hall. I mean, these are all times where you bring yourself back and you refocus your energy and you do the task that is really hard, that maybe you have to push yourself a little. So every time you make one of those decisions, then that is cause for celebration, because it's the accumulation of those decisions that add up over time to get you to where you want to be. And for some of you, for some of the clients that I have worked with, time management and procrastination are something that can come up and cause problems and cause you to take more time to do the things that you really want to do, or you start getting frustrated with yourself because you're not able to stick to a schedule. And if that's something that has been a challenge for you and you've been working on that, then I applaud your efforts. I want to encourage you to keep going. And if you would like an additional resource for that, I do have an episode about time management where I offer some strategies, including some strategies that help with procrastination, and that's episode number 2. Another area where you may be having day-to-day progress is in having difficult conversations. So sometimes it's a lot easier to ignore the elephant in the room and carry on with your day because you don't want to have that difficult conversation that might require you to set boundaries with a colleague or a client or even a friend or somebody who is in your personal life. It may be that you need to ask for help. Maybe it's talking to your assistant and asking them for help in the way that they are supporting you. Maybe it's turning to somebody more senior in your organization and saying, listen, I need some help here. I have a workload that is more than what I can comfortably handle right now, and asking for help in that respect. And every time you do that, every time you have one of those difficult conversations, it may feel really difficult in the moment. You may really resist it, might be uncomfortable. But the longer term effect of that is that you are now setting yourself up in a situation where you're getting used to practicing asking for what you want. You're getting used to having those difficult conversations and coming to a resolution instead of letting those situations escalate to the point that you feel like you're not even able to deal with them. And if you would like ideas on how to approach those conversations, I have a podcast episode all about an elegant approach to those difficult conversations, and that's episode number 15. It may be that some of the little decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis is the way that you're speaking to yourself. And this is something that I work on with my clients. I think so many of us have this narrative that goes on internally where we are not being our own best boss. We're not really supporting ourselves in the moment. We are saying things like, oh, you're not really ready for this, or so-and-so down the hall is faster than me, or what if I don't get this right? There's all this internal dialogue. And every time you catch yourself saying something that is unempowering and you address that thought, you pick a better thought, you just even acknowledge that you have it and you're going to keep moving forward anyways, every time you do that, you're building your muscle of having a much more positive dialogue internally. And if that's something that you've been working on, I applaud you. I encourage you to keep doing that. I do have another podcast episode on that. It's episode number 11. It's all about being your own best boss. So that is really reshaping that internal dialogue so that you're leading yourself in a way that is empowering as opposed to chipping away at the things that you are thinking that you're not doing so well. And finally, it may be that you're building up your relationships in a time where establishing connection has been more difficult. So we've all been operating in a pandemic situation. So for some of us, that means we are continuing to work at home. Maybe there's a hybrid situation. Maybe you're partly at home. Maybe you're partly at work, at the office. And for many of you, I know that that communication piece has been made all that more difficult because maybe you're in the office, but not everybody is. And there are individuals that you'd like to reach out to and connect with. You're not able to do it unless you're doing it over Zoom or over the phone. So every time that you have set out intentionally to forge a stronger relationship with whoever that may be, whether it's in your professional work or if it's in your personal life, every time you do that, you build up that network that is going to help support you, that network that is going to inspire you, where you are going to be able to serve others. And that, again, is a day-by-day decision that sets you up for success over the long run. And if you'd like some ideas on how to do that, again, I have a podcast episode that might help you with that. It's all about dealing with loneliness, and it's episode number 17. So still on the topic of celebrating you and celebrating the successes that you have made this year, we can also look at some of the bigger decisions that you've made, some of the bigger choices that have allowed you to really move forward in your career, move forward in your personal life, move forward in ways that make you feel so much better and that are setting yourself up for greater success in 2022. So some of the bigger decisions that may have been relevant to you this year is moving on from a position where you feel like there was no longer room for you to grow. And this happens where you reach a bit of a plateau wherever it is that you are, and you make that decision to move forward. And it can be somewhat scary because you may be giving up something that you've spent a lot of time establishing. But the opportunity on the other side of that is one of growth. It's one where you're excited. It's one you're feeling so much more aligned with your values and your goals. And so that might be something that you did this year. And if that's something that you are considering or that you've already done or that you might be doing in 2022, I would encourage you to listen to an episode I recently recorded. It's episode number 31. It's all about figuring out when it's time for you to make a move, when it's time to move on, or where it's time to recalibrate your existing role to bring in more of what it is that you want. Other examples of big decisions that you may have made this year, maybe it's deciding to leave a traditional practice. Maybe you're in private practice and you've made a decision to go in-house, or you've made a decision to move into the nonprofit space. Maybe you've made a decision to go back to school, get some additional training. There are all sorts of examples of what that can look like. And maybe that's a decision that you made that will help you get more balance in your life, that will help you align more with the goals that you have for yourself. So any of these decisions, I would encourage you to celebrate yourself for having made that decision, for moving yourself out of uncertainty and indecision into a place where you have more clarity. And sort of looking at what I'm proud of this year, because I'm going to offer some examples from my own practice. This year, one of my big goals was starting this podcast. And so this was a big accomplishment for me, and I feel really good about it. And as I'm continuing to grow my coaching practice, I took 2021 as a year of opportunity to really get out and build my relationships with individuals, with organizations, to really try to share the work that I'm doing with people just like you, so that you feel like there's a place where you can go and feel connected and have access to some of the concepts that I'm sharing with my clients. And hopefully, by doing so, you'll be able to make changes in your practice that will get you closer to your goals. And in order to do that, I have been out there doing webinars. I looked this morning at my calendar. I think I did almost 30 webinars this year, whether they were webinars for professional organizations, for law firms, for myself. I do them through my own company. There were a lot of webinars being done this year to reach people, to connect people. I have done this podcast, so I think we're on episode number 32. I've increasingly reached out to work with more clients. I have been consistent about reaching out on LinkedIn and emailing my weekly newsletter. If you're not on my list, please get on my list. You'll get notice of all the things that are happening. So these are things that I'm really proud of because these are the decisions that I made day by day. These are the decisions that I made month by month. And over the course of the year, I feel like this has been a really great year for building. And for you, maybe this is a year that you're going to be building, or that you've just built up your network, or you're starting your own firm and you're really establishing your own client base. So whatever that looks like to you, I would really just encourage you to celebrate that for what it is and to be proud of yourself moving into 2022. The baton that you're passing on is all part of that. Now, the second question that I would invite you to ask yourself is, what obstacles did you turn into opportunities? And it can be really difficult in the moment when things don't go your way to think that this is a big problem, that this is terrible, this is the worst thing that ever happened to you. And when this happens, when something does not go your way, I would invite you to ask yourself, how is it that I can make this the best thing that ever happened to me? And here are some examples of what may have come up over the course of the year that you can look at and think, well, initially I thought that was a really terrible thing, but actually it turned out to be really great. So maybe it's a client that you're working with who really pushed you to your edge. Maybe it's another lawyer in your firm that you were working with and the relationship just got very difficult. And as a result, you had to have a difficult conversation with that person. It was a really tough situation. You would not have wished it on yourself. But in that situation, you decided to have a conversation, you set clear boundaries, you maybe reached out to other members of your firm to get support in the decisions that you made, the actions that you were taking in relation to that. And as a result, you now feel more confident in your ability to set boundaries. You reestablished the balance of power in that relationship. You realize that other people support you in moving forward, that they recognize the value that you're contributing. So what was a negative has now become a positive. You learned how to stand up for yourself. It may be that you were in a position where the job itself, there was an issue with it, and maybe you needed to move on from a position and it wasn't necessarily something that you had anticipated or wanted. But as a result of having that movement from one job to another, you realized that you were not necessarily in a place that was right for you. Maybe you were no longer a good fit for that position. Maybe there was something about it. Maybe it was the practice area you were in. Maybe it was the individuals that you were working with or the clients that you were working with. And as a result, you found yourself a new position where you now find that you're so much more aligned with the work that you want to do, that you're so much more aligned with the vision that you have for yourself of your future professionally. It may be that you learned that you're a lot more resilient than you thought you were, that you were able to have this obstacle come up, and rather than sort of find yourself defeated or the victim of some situation that wasn't something that you had necessarily invited into your life, you had the resilience, you had the power, you had the persistence to overcome that challenge and to find a better place as a result. It may be your health. I know for a lot of you, a lot of us this year and last year have been particularly challenging with the added dynamic of the pandemic. So already managing your career and your personal life, including your health, may have been a bit of a struggle. And maybe this year it was even more so. But maybe you took the cues that came your way. Maybe you felt yourself getting really close to burnout. Maybe you were burnt out and you took that as a sign that you really needed to make some changes in your life. And so that may have led to a recommitment to your personal health, maybe getting more rest, taking a bit of time away from the office, figuring out how to delineate the boundaries between your personal life and your professional work, you may be doing those two things under the same roof. And so getting clear about what your new boundaries are going to look like and prioritizing your health. So maybe something that was not invited, maybe you did have a period where you felt lethargic and burnt out and anxious, and you were able to move past that. And now you can look back on that and say, I obviously did not feel good in that situation, but I was able to take that situation and turn it around. And for that, I'm really grateful. So I wanted to share, I mentioned I'd share some personal examples. So I've had a number of situations that I wasn't all that excited about in the moment, but that I managed to find a silver lining. And one of those is the Zoom blunder that I had way back in the spring. And I talk about it in episode number 3, which is all about how to turn around a bad day. And it really was the culmination of just having a lot on my plate and getting a little bit lost. You know, those days where you wake up and maybe you wake up and you slept in and it feels like everything you do that day is behind schedule or there's something off. And that was one of those days for me where I just had a lot on my plate and too many balls in the air for what I was comfortable with. And I was in this sort of largish Zoom meeting. I was presenting, and then I was in a conference. I was presenting. My turn was over, and I thought I had zoomed out or logged out of Zoom, and I hadn't. And then I'd sort of taken off my blazer, and I was sitting there poking around on my screen. And long story short, I was still part of a meeting. I just didn't know it, a different meeting. And I was so embarrassed when I realized what had happened. And at the time, it was not an experience I was super proud of. I was quite embarrassed, but I realized that I had put too much on my plate, that there were boundaries that I needed to set. I realized that I needed to take a step back. And as a result, I was able to do that. I was able to reconfigure. And I also had the added benefit of being able to use that experience as something that I shared on my podcast. And I think of all the episodes that I've recorded so far, that episode is the most popular. So it just goes to show that sometimes the things that happen where in the moment it's cringeworthy, in time, it actually can turn out to be a blessing in disguise. Another example for me is really watching for signs of burnout. And I love the work that I do, and I really don't want to stop. I have reasons why I do stop. I have my family that I want to spend time with. I don't want to leave my kids at school all day. So I do have hard stops to my professional work days. But I also find sometimes I'm so keen to get out there and share my work and do all the things that I can that sometimes it's really hard for me to put boundaries on that work. And sometimes I find myself getting really tired and I find myself getting close to burnout. And so really taking care to pay attention to when those signals pop up and then choosing to do something proactive about it. And I'm not perfect. I really do try. I think it's a balancing act. It's a practice. We're all doing it. All of you who are listening. I know you're in the same boat. I know you're all committed to your professional work. Some of you have young children like I do. It presents its own set, regardless of your situation. Everybody has their own set of challenges, and it's really a question of keeping an eye on the balance there and focusing on what makes you feel good, what makes you feel balanced and at peace and productive, and that you're advancing professionally the way that you want in the context of a balance that works for you. And for everybody, that's going to be different. Okay, moving on to question 3. What investments did you make in yourself in 2021? Here, investments can mean a lot of things. You have, let's look at what your resources are. Your resources are your time, your money, your energy, your focus. And what I would invite you to think about is, where did you invest this year? And what benefits did those investments yield for you? And it may be that you prioritized your health this year. After 2020, maybe you realized you need to get out more, you need to have more relationships with individuals, whatever that looks like at this stage of the world. Maybe you decided that you needed more professional development. Maybe you're a really junior lawyer and you found that there were not enough mentorship opportunities in this pandemic situation. And so you went out and you were really intentional about investing your time in finding mentors. Maybe you invested financially in courses to learn new skills. Maybe you realized that over the pandemic, your balance shifted too much in favor of professional work. Maybe with the new setup, maybe you were working at home and you found you were drifting too much into your professional workspace. And what you really wanted was to pull that back a little bit so that you had more clear time with your family that was actually family time, not work time. So maybe that was a way that you invested. You invested your time in your personal relationships and redistributed some of your professional time. And so you can look at that, look at the different sections of your life, look at how you invested, whether it was professional training, whether it was taking on new projects at the office. That will look different for everybody. If you want some ideas for planning, looking at how you might invest or how you might structure your time or structure your goals going forward, I do have a couple of podcast episodes, one about planning. That's episode number 22. That's all about sort of that big picture planning of how to look at things in the longer term. And I also have a podcast episode about goal setting. And that is a strategy that I use all the time. It's a great goal framework. GREAT is an acronym that I use when I'm setting up small goals and large goals. And it really can be motivating. And so if those are topics, and that's episode number 6, where I talk about goal setting. So if those are topics that maybe you did them already really well in 2021, and you're just going to do more of that in 2022, that's wonderful. If you'd like additional resources, those 2 podcast episodes can be really helpful. And if you look at that episode 6, which is the goal setting one, there's also a handout that goes with that if you'd like to sign up for that, which will give you a framework that you can use to set up basically any goal. Another investment that you may make is coaching, of course. And that is something that I invested in this year. I invested in a coach to bring my podcast to life. It was something that was really important to me. It was on my to-do list. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it if I was left to my own devices. And so I hired a coach. You met her in episode, I think it's either 30 or 31, Natalie Fisher. She is amazing. It's episode 30. Thank you. So you can find her there. She's a career coach. She's not a podcast creating coach most of the time, but it was really helpful to me to have somebody there who was able to keep me accountable, who I could ask questions of. She has her own podcast. It's a great podcast. And so you may have invested in a coach yourself. Maybe you worked with me. I've had the benefit of working with an amazing group of lawyers this year. I do one-to-one coaching. It's been incredible. I've worked with lawyers who reach out to me on their own. I work with lawyers who are paired with me through their law firm. And so for them, the investment has been really in themselves. This is how I experience my coaching relationships. I've had Natalie. I also am part of some coaching groups. And what I find is that the benefit is really in investing in myself. And for me, my investments are also, some of them are really purely personal investments in the sense that it's more skills that I'm trying to develop personally. But I would say most of the investing I've done recently in coaching is for my professional growth, for my business. And I find it so helpful to have an ongoing relationship with a coach where I'm really working on my mindset, I'm working on my goals, I'm thinking about where I want to go moving forward. And then I have that additional support that I need, that I enjoy to move forward. And so for any of you who are thinking about having coaching to help you move forward professionally or personally, and you have questions about it, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. You can email me, you can tag me on LinkedIn or whatever, reach out. I guess it's more of a DM on a LinkedIn, but whatever it is that would be helpful to you. And the, of course, follow-up question to this initial one of where have you invested your energy? What are the benefits that have flowed to you from having made that investment? And so if you're investing in your health, for example, maybe you have more energy. Maybe your days are more productive. If you're investing in training, maybe you find that your skills have really improved. If you're investing in your relationships, you may find that now at the end of the year, you've got all these connections and you feel really part of a community. So those are some of the benefits that might have accrued to you. For me, in doing this podcast, I have found that the benefits have really been fascinating. I love being able to connect with you every week. I love having this platform that I can share what I'm learning, what I'm doing, and I can share that with my clients. I share that with you. It's been a wonderful resource to have. I'm starting to have guests on my podcast, which is amazing because I get to have these really amazing conversations with other coaches or individuals who have information that I think is really useful to share with you as part of our growing community. Other sort of surprising things that have come out of this podcast, I've had organizations reach out to me to create webinars out of topics that I've covered on the podcast, which was never something that I had anticipated as happening and something that I love and I'm so excited to work on. So for all of you who are investing in yourselves and wondering, am I worth it? Is it worth it? The answer, I think, is yes. Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, whether you're investing your time, whether you're investing your money, whether you're investing your energy, whatever it is that you're investing, looking at that investment that you're making in yourself and going all in, I think is so worth it. So the next question that I would encourage you to ask yourself is, what are you letting go of? And this is a question that I've been asking myself quite a bit. My word of the year for 2022 is streamline. My word of the year this year was resonance. So this year I really focused on doing things professionally that really resonated with my values and my goals and what was really important to me. I will continue to do that, of course, but next year it's all about streamlining. It's kind of decluttering in all sorts of different areas. And I'd invite you to think about what you want to start letting go of in 2022. So one of the things that I'm working on, that a lot of clients that I coach are working on, is your relationship with time. This to me is an ongoing process because time is something that we all want to enjoy. We all want to maximize how we spend our time so that we're doing it in a way that aligns with what brings us joy, where we see value, what brings us growth. And I really love efficiency. I love thinking about time. And one of the things that I'm really working on and that I would encourage you to work on, or maybe you're already working on, is your relationship with time. And so one of the things that I'm trying to let go of is my relationship with time where I feel rushed. That is a common feeling for me. I feel like I'm rushed, that I get things done, but there's a bit of extra pressure. And I'd like to really recalibrate so that I'm feeling less rushed throughout the days. And if that is something that resonates with you, I did a podcast episode about this not that long ago, episode 26, called Making Peace with Procrastination. And really it's about thinking about the way that you relate to time so that your relationship with time can bring you more peace so that you can be productive without that nagging feeling that you might have of, some people call it overwhelm or stress or anxiety. It can show up like that. So that's one of the things that I'm going to let go of, or that I'm working on letting go of, is that what I called for myself, not for you, a bit of a dysfunctional relationship with time. I want to improve that relationship. Another thing you might be letting go of is perfectionism. And I did an episode about that, episode number 4. That's one that resonates with so many professionals. We're used to that top shelf work, the straight A's, the excellence in all places. And so sometimes perfectionism can get in the way of us doing the things that we really want. It can get in the way of us advancing professionally. So here, if you are interested in doing that, I refer you to that podcast episode number 4. It may be that one of the things that you want to let go of is other people's expectations of you. And this comes up a lot in the work that I do with lawyers at all levels, and especially for the junior lawyers who have maybe followed a path that is very much guided by external cues, and they haven't really done the exercise of thinking about what truly matters to them. Letting go of other people's expectations and other people's wants for them can be a big part of their growth. And so that might be something that you're looking at for 2022, is letting go of other people's expectations. And if that's something that you're working on, one thing I would suggest doing is thinking about how you define success. And I do a podcast episode about what it means to be wildly successful. And that is episode number 12. And the whole point there is to look at how you define success for yourself. And then you get to live into that definition of success. So if letting go of other people's expectations is what you're thinking about focusing on, that might be a resource that could be helpful for you. Another area where you may want to let go is control. And that may mean delegating more, that may mean dropping your standards, but that is an area that comes up quite often where I think we are type A achievers wanting to control all things possible, but sometimes that's not going to work to your advantage. Often it's not going to work to your advantage. So that's another thing that may be on your list. So if I look at the things that I'm trying to let go of entering into 2022, I'm thinking of that moment where I'm handing the baton over. It's December 31st, it's midnight, and I want to start 2022 with some, I've propped myself up a little bit. I've got the things that I managed to do in 2021. I've managed to learn from some of the challenges that have come up. I've invested in my professional work. And I'm also ready to let go of something. So what comes up for me in terms of letting things go? Number one is I'm trying to let go of clutter. So I've got a plan to start streamlining my systems. I want to start streamlining my thinking. So I've been a coach for a few years now, and this is work that I do often with my clients. So I'm on to myself. I'm on to that negative voice that shows up, but I continue to work on that. And so streamlining my thinking so that I'm thinking in a way that's more aligned with the goals that I have, as opposed to thoughts that sometimes cloud progress. Other things that I'm trying to declutter. I'm trying to declutter my approach to health, and this may sound a little odd, but I really like to have routines. I like to have routines where I'm going to bed early, I wake up early, I have my routines for exercise and the foods that I choose to eat and the relationships that I choose to have and the levels of stress, how I manage stress, etc., movement throughout the day. So I really just want to declutter the things that I'm doing that aren't adding to my health. Other things that I want to let go of, I am looking at letting go of control. I feel like I'm at a stage of life now where there are things that I no longer need to control quite so closely. I've got 2 young children. I talk about them sometimes on this podcast, and they're now 9 and 7. And so there are things that I've done for them previously that I'm ready to start shifting over into their domain of control. That may mean that they're not doing things the way that I would do them, and that's great. They get to choose how they are going to do things going forward. In my own business, there are areas where I'd like to let go of control. I'd like to have somebody to whom I can delegate some of the tasks that I'm doing so that I don't need to do them. In terms of relationships, I think it's showing up in my relationships, realizing how little control I have over other people. I think I'm already onto this. If you listen to the podcast episode that I recorded with Maggie Reyes, I think that's episode number 29. We talk about 5-star relationships, and she's a marriage coach. But even if you're not married, I think that the wisdom that she shares, the tips that she shares about relationships is really applicable to all relationships, even relationships that you have in the workplace. And one of the things that I would be letting go of, or I am letting go of, is that control piece. And really doing that at a conscious level, I think, is work worth doing for so many reasons. One of them being better relationships and less stress for you. And then another thing that I'm letting go of is fear and doubt. And again, this is work that I've been doing for years now. I've really done it consciously as a coach and as a coach who is building a practice. And to build a practice, I have needed to really put myself out there to communicate with others the work that I do and how I can help them. And so getting out there and over my fears of what it means to be posting things on LinkedIn and recording these podcast episodes and showing them to you. I had a lot of fear around producing this podcast. And I talk about it in that episode I mentioned, I think it's number 5, where it was something that was really terrifying for me. So being able to let go of fear and move through it quicker. I don't think that I can say that I no longer ever have fear, but when I do, I can see it. I can identify it. I know it's there. I can ask myself some questions about it, and I'm able to move through it more quickly because I've been practicing doing that. And the more you practice something, the better you get at doing it. Of course, it all comes down to your wiring in your brain, your neuroplasticity. These are learnable skills, which is wonderful. I talked about that in previous episodes. So that's something that I'm really going to be letting go of, is the fear and the doubt especially. And for any of you who are in a situation where you're at the beginning stages, maybe you've just launched your own law firm and you're wondering if you're going to have enough clients to fill your days, or if you're just starting out at a new law firm and you're in a new practice area and it seems really hard. Or you're trying to build a network and you're starting from zero. Maybe you just moved into a new city and you're literally starting from scratch and it feels like such an overwhelming task. And what I want to share with you is that the feeling of doubt can really be powerful, and it may stop you from taking action because you don't see the point. You think, well, I'm just going to do this and it's not going to work. And what I want to share with you is that I have had feelings of doubt that I have pushed through, and it's almost like, and I'm thinking about certain goals that I have for myself that at a point just seemed unrealistic. But because I have stayed committed to them, because I've continued to take action in that direction, it's almost like a teeter-totter where you reach that tipping point. And where you once felt doubt, you now, you kind of reach that breaking point where you no longer feel the doubt, and you just know that if you keep doing it, everything is going to fall into place, and then it's done, right? The teeter-totter, one side goes up, the other side goes down, and you've made it. And so if you're at that beginning stage and you feel doubt, I really just encourage you to keep going and to keep moving, and that the balance will tip. And it'll be so much easier to have that belief in yourself and the trust that it will all work out. So finally, question number 5. And I realize this podcast episode has gotten longer and longer, so thank you for staying with me. I know it's the holidays for many of you when this episode comes live. But the last question is, what advice will you give yourself on the eve of the new year? So if you look back at where you were on January 1st, 2021, and where you will be on December 31st, 2021, you'll be able to see the arc of the year. And now that we've gone through these exercises, especially, you'll know there are certain things that you've done that have been a great success. There are challenges that you've turned into stepping stones for more success. There are things that you now know based on the year having passed. And so it might be easier to start out this exercise by thinking about what advice you would have given yourself on the eve of January 1st, 2021. And some of the things that you may have told yourself at that moment might have been, you're going to work hard this year, and you'll be so grateful to yourself for having done that. Maybe your advice to yourself will be, you'll be surprised at how your efforts generate opportunities, likely in ways that you never would have anticipated. Maybe your advice would have been, when you feel rushed, remind yourself that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Remind yourself in every moment that there's a reason why you're there. So this is one that I like to say to myself, especially if I'm in a conversation and I'm not really sure why I'm in that conversation, or I put on a podcast and I think there's a reason why I'm coming to this podcast right now. If I open a book to a certain page, I think there's a reason why I'm drawn to this particular page. So it works both for things that you're finding really enjoyable, but also sometimes when something's really challenging. It's reminding yourself there's a reason for this to be happening. Maybe some advice is look for the lessons. They're everywhere. So again, particularly in those challenging situations, what are the lessons that you're drawing from that? Maybe it's you are going to make yourself proud this year. Maybe it's you're giving permission to others by going after your goals. Maybe there's something that you've done this year that's a little bit out of the ordinary. And by doing that, by pressing ahead and kind of pushing yourself, other people have seen you do that, and they then give themselves permission to push themselves too. And finally, maybe one of the pieces of advice you might have given yourself was, it's okay to pause, just keep taking the next right step. So those are words of advice that you may have given yourself back on the eve of January 1st of this year. And going into the next year, what is it that you might be saying to yourself on the eve of January 1st, 2022? Well, here are some ideas. I would invite you to come up with some ideas that resonate with you. But when you make decisions from a place of peace instead of fear, you will always make the right decision for you. And I watched this movie the other day. I know what it was, West Side Story. I went to the movie theater with my daughter to show her the most recent iteration of West Side Story. It's a play or musical that I really love. I've watched it, for years, first as a kid and now as a grown-up. And if you ever see that as the movie or the musical, you'll notice that the characters get all fired up. And when they're fired up, they make really bad decisions. And I guess you could say they also make decisions from a place of love. And those decisions don't always lead to the best outcomes for the individuals involved. But I don't think that there are any regrets that come from the decisions that were made when the characters were making those decisions from a place of love. And to me, it was this kind of neat example of that playing out in a story. And the same is true for us in our professional lives and in our personal lives. If you think about the decisions that you're making day to day, when you make those decisions from a place of fear, and that might be when you're in a panic or that fight or flight state, something stressful is happening, you may not make decisions that are the best decisions for you in the long run. Versus if you allow yourself to make decisions from a place of calm and peace, that's really when you make those decisions that are aligned with what you truly want. And those tend to be the better decisions. So maybe making decisions knowing that this is going to be your best year yet. And you're setting yourself up for greater success even in 2023. Maybe it's focus on your own joy and the rest will follow. And finally, advice that my daughter gave to me. It's a long story, but it's super cute. Nothing can stand between you and your awesomeness. So that's a shout out to my daughter. And she gives the best pep talks. I talked about her in a previous podcast episode. So that, my friends, is all that I have to share with you today. So I'm just going to recap those questions. Number 1, what are you proud of that you did this year? Number 2, what obstacles did you turn into opportunities? Number 3, what investments did you make in yourself and how did those investments pay off? Number 4, what are you letting go of? And question number 5, what advice will you give yourself on the eve of the new year? So with that, my friends, I wish all of you the most amazing wrap up to 2021. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. I hope that you've been enjoying the podcast. If you have been enjoying it, I would love for you to rate and review the podcast. That is the biggest gift you can give to me and to others because it will help them find this podcast and then they too can share the podcast. They can become part of our community. If this podcast resonates with you and you think that you have friends who would enjoy it, by all means, please share it with them as well. And thank you so much for joining me every week. Thank you so much for making this podcast such a pleasure to be recording. I would love to hear from any of you who'd like to reach out on LinkedIn or send me an email. And that's it for 2021. My dear, dear friends, thank you again. Have a beautiful week, and I will look forward to reconnecting in 2022. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.